mental processes, but also the well-being of the people working within the sport arena. And as I said, you could put performance and exercise in there too. And it's a great definition on screen there from our colleague, Professor Aidan Moore, who we miss very much, and whose anniversary for, having left us just a year ago now is just coming up. In terms of then the other applied role that I mentioned, apart from kind of academic, this is what sports psychology is in academia. In applied psychology or applied sports psychology, it is basically taking what we know from psychology academically through our scientific research and study and applying it in the settings in which athletes and coaches and referees and all these people within sport work. So in terms of what sports psychologists do, I suppose the key thing to point out is that, a lot of the time people think when they go into a career as a sports psychologist that it's all about performance enhancement. And maybe 10 years ago, that might have been where we would have viewed sports psychology as sitting. But actually it's moved on a lot since then. So now we're very much kind of focused on the well-being and the kind of the athletic, I suppose, lifestyle of the individual. So you can't perform well within sport or in exercise or performance arenas if you're not in a good, healthy place, which is why well-being of the individual is really emphasized now much earlier than performance enhancement would come after that, okay? So some of the areas we do work in is obviously things like performance enhancement, working with athletes on their mental skills, their concentration, their coping skills. And then we also work with teams where we look at things like cohesion and leadership and all of the topics you would study in sports psychology. One of the areas close to my heart is injury rehabilitation, my PhD with Professor Aidan Moore, and I did my degree in UCD, and then I did my master's on my PhD with Professor Aidan Moore, and my PhD area was psychology of sport injuries. And then, as I said, athlete lifestyle is a key area we work with many people on. And then skill acquisition, motor skill learning, those kind of things. Coaches and referees, we work with a lot. People think sports psychologists only work with athletes. We don't. We work with the coaches, the referees, all of the people around the athlete as part of a multidisciplinary team in many cases in our applied consulting roles. And then the final two on the right hand side of the screen there, in terms of mood and cognitive enhancement and exercise adherence, that's where really your exercise psychology comes into play. And the reason why I'm kind of emphasizing exercise psychology a little bit is because many of the programs that you do at postgraduate level are not sports psychology in isolation, they're sport and exercise psychology, or sport exercise and performance psychology, which is a new area. Now, anybody who's really interested in knowing what does a sports psychologist days typically look like, a really good video on YouTube is by Dr. John Mathers, based over in the UK, and you could have a look at that on YouTube and you could see where he's talking all about, a day in the life of a sports psychologist. And he talks all about his academic role, his researcher role, his scientific role, and then he having a background in sport, which many of us do. So many sports psychologists go from their interest area into their professional career area as consultants and as practitioners. We often have a very strong background in sports. So many of my colleagues and myself have a strong background in sports. Suzanne would know, for example, that my background is as a sprinter, and I was an elite sprinter for many years and ran for UCD and so on before I moved on and retired a number of years ago. But still like to keep fit and still like to keep active. I think you have to practice what you preach. So in terms of what you're here to hear about really is you want to know the pathway and the progression to becoming a sports psychologist. So one of the things that I would say is that we work in a very diverse range of settings and with a very diverse range of people. So we work with everybody from novice athletes, intermediate to elite athletes, and across all the different spectrums of kind of age ranges, cultural backgrounds, and also even people with, Paralympians and a wide range of individuals, okay? Many of us work, kind of, as I said, in combined roles. So as I've said there on screen, we work often in teaching and research and academia, and then we work as consultants. There's very few sports psychologists around Ireland and even indeed wider afield in the UK and so on. There's probably more opportunities in the UK, Australia, America and so on. But in Ireland specifically, the people who are working as sports psychologists, they don't work as practitioners as their full-time job. They often have other roles, and it's part-time positions that they fill with professional teams or with national governing bodies. So currently, how do you become a sports psychologist? So I suppose the key thing to remember is, and I'm sure you've heard this morning before I ever have to say it, so that's probably good, I don't have to go through it in a huge amount of detail, is that currently we are going through this process with CORU, whereby the term psychologist is being protected, or it's going to come into force in the next couple of years, okay? In the UK, that is already the case. So on the island of Ireland, up in Ulster, there is a master's degree, which I'm going to talk about, which is BPS accredited, and you go then to the stage 2 of your qualification as a sport and exercise psychologist. So in the UK, the term psychologist is protected, and actually they specifically have protected the term sport and exercise psychologist, and there's a very specific route you need to follow and specific qualifications you need to get in order to work as a practitioner in the UK. It's a little less clear and a little bit more muddied water when it comes to practicing in Ireland, which I'll come to in a moment. So in terms of how do you become a sports psychologist in Ireland, the first thing is obviously you would do your undergraduate degree, which many of you are all coming towards the end of maybe completing, and maybe in your final year or your third year of study. And then after that, you would go on and complete a master's program of some kind. Okay, currently in Ireland, there are no formal PSI accredited sports psychology programs. Currently, I know UL, because I'm involved in some of the work to do with that, has submitted an application to have their sport exercise and performance degree accredited by PSI, okay, at a master's level, an MSc. So after your undergraduate degree, you would do your master's. Up in University of Ulster is another program, an MSc program again, and it is BPS accredited, and it offers a pathway then to go to your stage 2 of where you can do your supervision, your 2-year supervision underneath a qualified supervisor within your area of sport and exercise psychology. In PSI and in Ireland, there's not many people who can do that supervision, so often non-sport psychologists can act as the supervisors for some budding sports psychologists who want to achieve that in Ireland, okay? Some other routes are that you can do things like accredited doctorate programs, and you can also do a clinical program and then follow it up with a master's in sports psychology after your undergraduate degree. Now, that's more specific to people who want to be what's called a clinical sports psychologist, okay? When I said I wear many hats, I only wear hats that are an academic sports psychologist or academic psychologist, chartered psychologist, and also then a researcher and a practitioner as an applied sports psychologist. I do not have clinical specific training. So it means anything outside the realm of the norm, the normal populations, I would refer them on to my clinical sports psychology colleagues if an issue arises that I think is beyond the realms of what my area of practice is. So in terms of then the pathways, this is just a nice diagram to kind of, I suppose, summarize in terms of the BPS, PSI, and also I've referred to Sport Ireland here. So at every level, there's kind of that undergraduate degree level, followed by your postgraduate qualifications, followed by your kind of 2 years of supervised training, okay? Or your kind of, as Sport Ireland requires, a number of days or a number of hours of supervised practice, okay? Working with athletes, teams, and so on, okay? So they're that's a nice kind of flow chart to show you the kind of the progression of your studies throughout the process of becoming a qualified sports psychologist, okay? But again, remembering in Ireland, it's a little less clear, and it's probably the point I'd like to finish on. So this is the courses that are available in Ireland. So I've mentioned University of Ulster, they have an MSc in Sport and Exercise Psychology. It is BPS accredited. So after your undergraduate degree, go and do your level 9, and then that would be followed by your supervised practice and training. The MSc in UL, I've mentioned, is currently seeking a PSI, and potentially then maybe might qualify for BPS accreditation as well. The MSc in Applied Sport and Exercise Psychology in WIT is also, it's not running this year as far as I know due to COVID, but they would hope to have it running in September of 2021, one would hope. I know many of you are online here as budding kind of graduates of psychology. Some people who haven't got that qualification, if they want to kind of dip their toe in the sports psychology area to then see what they like to go on and do postgraduate training and conversion courses in psychology to become a sports psychologist. There's an IADT program that I run, which is like a taster program. It's a level 8 certificate in sports psychology. So if you know of anybody who's a coach or an athlete and wants to kind of maybe come back to study, that's a way of not devoting 4 years of your life to see, kind of after 6-8 months, do I like this area? And then maybe you could go and devote your time to becoming an accredited sports psychologist. In Ireland, Sport Ireland is the main accrediting body, and they accredit you after you've completed your postgraduate training, your undergraduate degree in psychology, and then you've submitted your case study and so on. Then you would be qualified to work with their Olympic athletes and some of their Olympic panel individuals. So to finish up with then, and I'm not quite sure how I'm doing for time, I'm sure Suzanne will be able to come in and tell me. I hope I'm not gone over too much. Let me just check my clock here. Oh, pretty much bang on, Suzanne, so I'm not doing too bad at all. She'd tell you she could talk for Ireland normally. So in terms of just some, I suppose, points of note and reflection, I just wanted to mention that when it comes to working as a sports psychologist in Ireland, there's a couple of things you need to be ready for. They are, first of all, there's still a small degree of skepticism in our area, that we still have to convince people about the value that we bring to a multidisciplinary team. A lot of sports teams, a lot of elite athletes, they know they need a physiotherapist, they know they need a medic, they know they need various people in their sport team environment. The sports psychologist sometimes is not somebody that they prioritize in many cases, which is a shame, because we know the importance of health and well-being for those individuals before they even step into that kind of performance arena, okay? And that's where we can add value and we can really help them. So be prepared for skepticism, be prepared for the gurus. And by that, I mean, there's many people working in our area as performance coaches, as mental skills coaches, and they don't often call themselves sports psychologists now because they know Koru is coming down the line and that you have to have specific qualifications and training. But many of them often think that they know all about sports psychology just by being kind of, past athletes or performance coaches, having done a master's but not having done a degree in psychology in the first place. So in terms of the area as a whole, I suppose I'd like to finish off on a really positive note. And that is, as Suzanne again, and many of my colleagues online this morning would probably tell you, all of us working in our area, we're really passionate about it. I know Suzanne is really passionate about being an academic and a researcher. I am too, in my kind of little corner of the world as well. So being passionate about the area, whether it's clinical, educational, sport, whatever it is you want to go into, that's important, but it's not enough on its own. There's a lot of hard work, a lot of perseverance, which all of you are learning through your undergraduate studies, that's required. So in terms of sport, I suppose, again, looking at today, lots of sport on TV, lots of big events, Six Nations, etc. going on. Suzanne again would know my background in dealing with a lot of individuals within the rugby arena, if you like. You do work a lot of weekends, there's travel required, and you probably have to be okay with knowing you probably won't work as a sports psychologist on its own as a consultant. You would be teaching, researching, which is really good because it forms your applied practice, okay? And we should be all doing that, okay? So be prepared to work in other domains. So that's pretty much all I want to say today. Thanks a million for listening, and I'm happy, Suzanne, I don't know how I am for time to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Olivia. A fascinating talk as usual. We have time for one or two questions. There's one question that has come in on the Q&A field, which is, where can I find a list of accredited PSI supervisors for sports psychology?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Suzanne. And it's a difficult one because, as I said, there's many people who might offer to do supervision, but they don't really have specific sports psychology backgrounds because there's not many of us working in that area. So I suppose it's really important when you're doing your master's in sports psychology, you build up a network of people that you know. So I know, for example, in UL, people like Mark Campbell, people like Claude Butler. In Maynooth now, you've got the likes of Dr. Tyke McIntyre and various people. They often, as Suzanne has said, have research roles that then help to enable you to get that kind of supervised training as part of your research, but as part of, applied practice as well. So there's not a specific list of people. Sport Ireland does have a list of people working in the area on their website, and it might be, an option to go in and have a look at the kind of accredited Sport Ireland sports psychologists and see would one of them on that list of people on the Sport Ireland website offer some supervised practice or supervision for trainee sports psychologists. So that would be my advice.